Hi students, today we start a new chapter, that is laws of motion. Very important chapter for the class 11. Now in your previous chapter, that is motion in a straight line, the discussed topics was about the motion, about the rest. But in this chapter, we will discuss about the causes of motion. If any body is in motion, then that body obeys some rule. Some law must be obeyed by the body. There are few reasons of the motion for that body. So now in this chapter we discuss about the causes of motion, and when a body is in motion, then which laws are obeyed by that body. We'll discuss about this. So at first, just I give one example. It is also discussed in your previous, that means junior class 9. That is the Newton's first law of motion. So when the laws of motion will start about the chapter, the very important things are the Newton's laws of motion. We know there are 3 laws of motion. First is Newton's first law of motion, then Newton's second law of motion, and then Newton's third law of motion. Each laws of motion has a particular importance. But remember, in between these 3 laws of motion, the second laws of motion is known as the real laws of motion. Because we can go from second law of motion to third law of motion, as well as from second law of motion to the first law of motion. That means we can explain the first law and third law by the Newton's second law of motion. How? In this chapter we'll discuss. So for that, wait for the next video. But now today we'll discuss about the Newton's first law of motion. So in the Newton's first law of motion, suppose this pen is in rest, and if you apply any force on this pen, then the pen starts to move. So the pen was in rest, and when you apply any external force on it, then the pen starts to move. Similarly, this pen is moving. Now you apply the force, the pen comes into rest. So we can say that when an object is in rest, then if you apply some external force on it, then it starts to move or try to move or achieve the tendency to move. And if any object is in motion, and if you apply the force against the motion, then the object can come into rest or slow down. But remember one thing, that is the main. So we can say this is the object of mass m. If this object is in rest, it always be in rest. Suppose one book is on your table and if you never apply any external force on that book, no external force is applied on the book, then the book always be in rest. So the rest body always be in rest if no external force is applied on it. Similarly, if any object is in motion, then the object will be in motion forever if no external force is applied on it against the motion. Suppose you throw a cricket ball on the ground. So the cricket ball will move with a particular speed, and after a few time it will come into rest. Why? Because when the ball was moving on the ground surface, then the frictional force is acting at the surface of contact between the ball and the ground surface. So this frictional force is the external force which opposes the motion. If you can prepare any surface where no frictional force and always no air resistance, that means you prepare one space, there is no that is air, and the surface is completely smooth, no friction will be there. At this situation, if you throw a cricket ball, then the cricket ball will move forever, because now no external force is acting on that ball. So this is the Newton's first law of motion. Newton's first law of motion states that if any body is in rest, that will be in rest forever, and if any body is in motion, that will be in motion, uniform motion along the same straight line if no external force is applied on it. So this is the Newton's first law of motion. But one thing, Newton's first law of motion is not only a statement. From these laws of motion we'll get to idea. What? From the Newton's first law of motion we get the idea, that is, first one is the inertia. Inertia. This is the property of an object. This inertia means if any body is in rest, it always try to be in rest. कोई बॉडी अगर रेस्ट में है तो ये बॉडी रेस्ट में ही रहना चाहता है. And if any body is in motion, that always try to be in motion. कोई बॉडी अगर मोशन में है तो ये हमेशा मोशन में ही रहना चाहता है. इसीलिए जब तुम फैन स्विच ऑफ करते हो तो फैन इमीडिएटली रेस्ट में नहीं आ सकता है, क्योंकि फैन घूम रहा था. द फैन वॉज इन मोशन. So the fan has the tendency to be in motion. So when you switch off the fan try to be in motion. But due to the air resistance, the motion is opposed and at last it comes into rest. So this fan has the tendency to be in motion and try to be in motion. That's why it takes few time to be in rest, to come into rest. Similarly, when you apply any force, suppose object is placed on the surface and you apply force. So when you apply force, then the body always try to be in rest. But when you apply more force, then the body try to be move or starts to move. So this is the property, this property for which a rest body try to be in rest and a moving body try to be in motion. That property is known as the inertia. And this idea we get from the Newton's first law of motion. Because in the Newton's first law of motion, Newton's at first told that rest body will be in rest and moving body will be in uniform motion if no external force is applied. So from that first law we are getting this idea about inertia. These inertia are also of two types, and one is inertia of rest and another is inertia of motion. Inertia of rest, for this inertia a rest body try to be in rest, and inertia of motion, for this inertia a body, that means if it motion, it try to be in motion. So these are the first things, inertia. We get the idea from the Newton's first law of motion. Now second thing is, that is the definition of force. Definition of force. What is the definition of force? This object, this is an object, this object is in rest. So if this object is in rest, this object, I can say this object is in now inertia of rest, and you apply a force F on it, then the body starts to move, That means at first the body was in inertia of rest, and when you apply an external force on it, then the body starts to move. That means the body come into inertia of motion. So here the body was in inertia of rest, and at last it comes to inertia of motion. That means inertia of the body is changed. So if the inertia of the body is changed, why the inertia is changed? Due to this force. So we can define the force such a way. Force is that by which the inertia of any body can be changed. Force is that by which the inertia of any body can be changed. So the definition of force, this also we get from the Newton's first law of motion. There are different examples. When a bus suddenly starts, then the passengers in the bus feel a backward jerk. Why? Because when the bus is in rest, then the lower portion of the passenger which is in contact with the bus always in rest, and the total body also in rest. But when the bus suddenly starts, with the bus, the lower portion of the body of the passenger which is in contact with the bus starts to move. बस के साथ कांटेक्ट में जो पोर्शन था पैसेंजर का, वो बस के साथ मोशन में चला गया. बट द अपर पोर्शन ऑफ द बॉडी जो रेस्ट में था, वो रेस्ट में ही रहना चाहता है. Why? Due to the inertia of rest. So here the lower portion starts to move with the bus, but the upper portion try to be in rest due to the inertia of rest. That's why the passenger feel a backward jerk. And similarly, if the running bus suddenly stopped, the passenger feel a forward jerk. I hope you know about this. This is also discussed in class 9. So this is about the first law of motion and inertia. And if you study any book or class 9 book, if you also have, then you get different example of inertia of rest and inertia of motion. You will just read that things also and wait for the next video that will be uploaded very soon. Thank you.